I'll introduce myself. My name is Michael Dunford. I am the Strategic Marketing Manager for Catalyst, and this is part of our Thought Leadership series. So, welcome to Addressing the Elephant in the Classroom, using a design lens to tackle some of the big issues in K-12 education. So, I'll do a quick intro of Catalyst, just in case you don't know. But if you work in education, your job is not always easy. Your job is hard, actually. It's really hard, and we appreciate everything you do. We just want to be a support partner to you to help you develop the environments where your students, your administration, your teachers can thrive, but we think there's a better way to do it. So we've partnered with organizations like Wenaha Group, a native-owned construction management firm, Artcobell, a furniture manufacturer whose sole purpose is K-12 learning environments, and Miller Knoll, a industry leader in a lot of different furniture types. Herman Miller Knoll, they make fantastic, durable products. So that you can get a holistic approach to a process, to a project that's really thoughtful, that's strategic, that adds a lot of value throughout the entire thing. So rather than thinking we know everything and we can do it all by ourselves, we think it's better to go together. So that's a little bit about us, thank you. Now, speaking of better together, we've got a fantastic group of panelists. We did a bunch of pre-calls to prep for the event, and they always left me feeling really inspired, really excited, a little nervous sometimes about what would happen if we didn't start tackling some of these issues. But I got, tingly feelings after all these calls. It was a good thing. Let's begin. We've got some fantastic people joining us. And we'll start with Patricia Cadigan. She's the VP of Learning Environments at Artcobell. Then we have Tina Naraghi-Pour McKone, Design Manager at Gensler. Jacob Simmons, Strategy Practice Lead at Gensler. And Dr. Melanie Quaempts, Education Consultant. Okay, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you got into this industry. What makes you tick?
What makes me tick? So I'm Patricia Cadigan. I'm the VP of Learning Environments at Artcobell. We are a furniture manufacturer in Temple, Texas, and we are fully integrated, which means we make it all at Artcobell. We bend the steel, we lay up the tops. We do not. The only thing we import is probably like casters and some glides and things like that. So if you ever have an opportunity to want to see a full manufacturing plant, please come to Temple, Texas. We'd love to give you a tour. With that, what makes me tick? So I come to this position with 28 years of public education experience. I was a teacher for 10 years. I taught in an inner city school district in Tucson, Arizona, where I learned very, very quickly that I have a passion for students. I love kids. I was a teacher, I was a coach, I did everything I could in order to promote the opportunities for my students in our school. Then I had moved into administration where, and I don't think many people get this chance, but I was an administrator at every level. So I have seen learning and child development from kindergarten all the way through post-secondary. So I was an elementary principal, I was a middle school assistant principal. All my middle school folks in the room can look at me and go, oh, we're so sorry. But I was also an athletic director, and then I was a high school principal for 7 years at a very large comprehensive high school in Tucson, Arizona. I had almost 3,000 students in my school. And so then I said, what am I going to do when I grow up? I don't want to be a superintendent. I don't know. And so I met this amazing company called Artcobell, who said, do you want to come work for us and help us connect the dots? And I didn't know what that meant, and they didn't know what that meant. And my financial planner said, oh, go ahead. Sold my house in Tucson, moved to Texas, and I now have the opportunity to influence and to talk to people, great people like you, about this transformation of education. What do we need to do to connect the dots between teaching, learning, and the learning environment so our students can be successful when they step out into the work world? And so I get to do this all over the United States and Canada. I'm very, very lucky. I keep trying to convince my boss that, we do sell some furniture in Chile and, Dubai and things like that. He hasn't sent me there yet, but we'll work on that. So what makes me tick is I believe that our society is built on the education of our students, and our students are only successful based on what we provide them, and that is what I'm passionate about. So I will then turn it to Tina.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tina Naraghi-Pour, McKone. I think the other day I was talking to someone who was working in data centers, and he switched from museums to data centers, and I said, wow, what a change. How do you like it? And he said, architecture is architecture. And I think that's just not the case for me. If I'm not doing K-12 and education architecture, I'm really not happy with my work. And so for me, education architecture has become very personal. My parents immigrated to the United States from Iran. I grew up in Louisiana. It's 49th in the country for education. So when they were talking to their immigrant friends about where to send us to school, they said, you have to go to these magnet or gifted and talented schools. Those schools were located in neighborhoods where the poverty rate was 40 to 45%. And what I realized later on was putting a school there, Louisiana thought, we're raising the test scores in these neighborhoods. I think what they didn't think was we're providing access to education to students who need it the most. And that's access to parks, access to career fairs, and a place where we could go across the street, get a po' boy at a gas station, and bring it back and eat on our benches. If we didn't have that place to eat, we'd be loitering. So I think education architecture is really important because infrastructure is so important to the neighborhoods that we're designing in. I think what makes me tick is when we kind of neglect the neighborhoods that we're designing in, and we look at it insularly, right? We're not thinking about the teachers that are using the space, the students that are using the space, the neighborhoods that we're affecting with our infrastructure. So that's kind of what sucked me into K-12 architecture, and that's probably why I'm never gonna leave.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacob Simmons. I'm strategy director and the head of the strategy practice at Gensler. I had the privilege of being exposed to design at a very young age, and what makes me tick to this day is just the exposure to what many of us refer to as creative confidence. I think just the permission to explore, to experiment, to take risks, to fail, and just to kind of approach things from a different angle is something that's always stuck with me at a young age. And the pursuit of industrial design and anthropology as a professional has really shaped my relationship with strategy and my relationship to education generally. I think generally there's a lot of opportunities in our community today to reconceive of things based on a premise that is kind of uncertain and overly complex at the moment. But it just requires a level of ingenuity that is innate to all human beings. And I think that just opportunity to convene groups of people like this, have discussions about complex systems, to ask questions that are profoundly challenging to answer, and hold the space for those things to flourish is just really kind of innate to all of our capacities. But unfortunately, it's learned out of us for a lot of students and for a lot of professionals. I see a lot of people that are very late in their careers, and they didn't have the opportunity to think this way. So that's really been at the core of my relationship with education. As an educator, teaching creative confidence, design thinking, generative research, et cetera, has really been my focus. It hasn't been so much topical, but rather kind of cultivating the conditions necessary for creativity and innovation to thrive within our communities and within our organizations. That's been really formative for me. So thanks for having me today.
Good morning. I'm Melanie Quaempts, and I'm here. I have two hats on today. The first hat is my husband and I own Winnahaw Group, which Michael talked a little bit about, so always happy to talk construction with you if you'd like. And there's a fabulous Winnahaw team right here, so that makes me feel really cozy and comfortable. And the second one is I spent 20 plus years and still am in the pre-K, post-12 learning environments. So what motivates me, I'm actually going to put into practice right now, okay? So we're going to get to know a few of you in the room, and you kind of get a feel for my life journey. Raise your hand if you've ever turned a piece of furniture over to see where it came from. Okay? I'm going to say most of you are interested in furniture and design, until I moved into this world that you live in as a teacher, I didn't do that. I just shook it to make sure it was level. Okay, and so I'm always learning, and it's been an exciting adventure for me to personally transition kind of my life passion, which is creating a more compassionate world. And that's started when I was teaching as a third grade teacher in middle school, high school. At the end of the day, whether or not they remember anything I have to say, are they better people? Are they kinder people? And seeing where that fits in. So I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. How many of you chose the spot you're sitting in this morning because it either, you're going to put a 1 up if it was because it looked super cozy and you were ready to kind of nestle in for this panel, or number 2, it met your needs to put all of your supplies that you have, your food, your computer. So 1 if it was just cozy. How many are 1s? 2s if it was based on, okay, so see, I'm learning a little bit about you already, right? We have a nice mix of people who are get it done and people who are, let me sit back and let's see how we're going to get it done, right? Let's talk about it. So that's a little bit about me.
That was good.
Well, I picked, did you hear, how do we pick our seats?
Yeah, there's the most comfortable lounge seats you've ever sat in, right? Yeah. Okay, so you kind of just said some of this, but I just want to take it one step further. I want the audience to get further into those crazy heads of yours. What is the one big issue you hope we address in education in the coming years? The one thing. Who wants to start?
I kind of alluded to it, is that we're all in this together. May it be architects, designers, educators, furniture manufacturers, flooring people, acoustics, all these things. We all know that education, we're here because we're talking about education. It's at a tipping point. We have a lot of things. You can pull up an article right now and it's going to tell you that, the U.S. educational system's in crisis. I'm not a hair on fire. I don't think we're in crisis, but I do think we're at a tipping point. And we have to make some really serious decisions. We need to do it collectively. And that's where I'm at today, is how do we all start having a conversation about how to support our educators and support our systems?
I think for me, it goes back to access and equity for education and what that means. It's not just a box that we're checking because society is calling for us to check that box now. Students are spending over 15,000 hours in buildings that we're curating for them. So I think we need to take responsibility for that. I also think if you think about access and equity, it's for who or for whom. And so we talk about we're a home away from home, but whose home, right? It's because not everyone's home looks the same. And what are those students' needs? Addressing those, what are the teachers' needs? Because the cool thing about education is you don't have one client. You have the community, you have the district, you have the student, and you have the teachers. And so I think thinking about that holistically helps us design better facilities. And I think once we start addressing that from a perspective of it's not just a box we're checking, but an issue we're really trying to solve and we're constantly solving it, we'll be able to design better buildings for our students and teachers and communities.
For me, it's just normalizing conversations around neurodiversity within our institutions, whether that's academic or professional. The cultures that we create and the shame that many students and professionals feel when they are not part of a neurotypical majority is just really counterproductive to the success of our business and the welfare of human beings generally writ large. So I think we just need to normalize this conversation and recognize that it's part of the natural biodiversity that exists within the human race and within society. We need to talk about its implications within our institutions.
So I think about social constructs. So thinking about when we were in school, when our parents were in school, when our grandparents were in school, now that some of us have kids in school now. We just had our first grandchild 2 weeks ago, so she's going to be in school someday. And I think about what what is happening. Schools, to me, are a reflection of the community, right? They're a mirror of what's happening in the larger community. And as I draw it back to this world of design and thinking about flexible seating like we have here this morning, this is not something my grandma experienced. My grandma didn't experience wearing pants to school. So, just thinking about what's going to be the reflection of the larger community and what's going to be that social construct. Evan, raise your hand, Evan. Evan and I had an opportunity to collect a lot of data for a particular school district. And we got giddy over what it was telling us. And what it was telling us that there was the data we collected from students said that across the board, no matter how a student saw themselves or, what they represented or what their home life was like, or when it came to the schoolhouse, they shared something all in common, which was they all hated going to the bathroom. And every student had a story about that. From I never go, I hold it all day, I go when I get home, to I go, but I'm scared, I go, there's drugs, I go, but I don't know which bathroom to go in. There was all sorts of stories, and there wasn't one student in middle school and high school that didn't reflect back to their elementary years that didn't have that shared experience. And I remember, thank you, Evan, by the way, he's great at collecting data and analyzing it, taking that information back to the school district, and there was just a tension in the room because folks in the school district really weren't sure what this meant. Was this going to be something that restrooms were going to have to change? And if so, how would they navigate this political perception, people's experience, culturally? And I remember that one of the architects from DLR, actually out of Portland, said, I remember something like this 30 years ago. He said, now I've dated myself. He said, 30 years ago, we sat in this room and there was this kind of tension around ADA accommodations. And we all went, well, we're going to have to change furniture. We're going to have to move walls. We're going to have to make walkways bigger. And he said, and now we just do it. We don't even think twice about whether or not this accommodation needs to be made. It is part of our normal set of standards. It's part of our specifications, whether it's furniture or walls. And he brought the level of anxiety in the room down with people who are in a pretty traditional, systemic reflection of society, that, schools were made back in the day for a certain profile person, and that's not who's going to schools today. And he brought the tension down, and he said to the school district, you're paving new ways. And I hope it's not 30 years from now that we look back and say it's normalized. It's just what we do. We make individualized bathrooms. And he said, but you're starting a journey. And for this school district, it had consequences, right? It wasn't written in the construction codes. It wasn't financed when they went out for their bond. It was going to be more expensive. But they went back to their core values. So I don't know what the challenges are going to be like in the future, but I've learned, especially over the last several years, that if it's aligned to core values and you keep coming back to that in difficult times, like when the room fills with tension about what to do with restrooms, you're gonna find the right path.
I love that. Okay, so I thought of this the other night, and it to me it was like a little spark above my head. I thought it was really cool. This was not on purpose, this was an accident, but this panel does some interesting things. There's some context here, and I wanted to frame you guys before we actually dive in. So Jacob, as a researcher and social scientist, informs the buildings and the spaces that Tina creates. Patricia fills those with all the wonderful tools and things needed and teaches people how to use them. And then Melanie is able to add expertise along any step in the process with your interesting background. So you guys are a really cool panel because you all approach things from a different perspective. And sorry you have to fight for one microphone, but please pass it back and forth liberally. Thank you. So, okay, we don't have as much time as we want, right? We could talk for hours. So let's kind of fire through some of these things, and please interrupt each other and get into some thoughts. Jacob, you said one of the big things you wanted to tackle was neurodiversity. Speak a little bit more about that. How should we be designing environments to support students?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you just pointed out the diversity of this group here. We're trying to have an interesting conversation. Let's just start by underpinning the fundamental belief that the success of our organizations, our society, et cetera, is predicated on said diversity, greater than what we can possibly represent in 4 people, of course. But this is just a fundamental belief that we have to ensure that we all carry. And it really begs the question about neurodiversity, which I of course brought up. And I think a natural starting point is to just recognize that there's also kind of a neurotypical condition that exists because it gets a lot of attention. A neurotypical, just generally, folks with cognitive function that looks similar to about 80% of people around them. That's a big portion of the society. It tends to get a lot of attention. We design systems, by and large, for that typical condition. There's, of course, also a lot of conversation around kind of neurodegenerative conditions because it's oftentimes very traumatic, and grief and pain can be very motivating for us. We see things particularly related with time and age, potentially drug use, head trauma, persistent stress, things like dementia occur. That's also kind of very different than I think what we're kind of primarily talking about, which is neurodiversity. We're talking about the 20% of the population, their cognitive function, the way they think, the way they process information, the way they learn, of course, is different than other folks. And then my comment around normalizing conversations in this space is just the observance of a situation in which we oftentimes hear things like, well, Gen Z is very sensitive. They're very kind of entitled and self-edifying. And I think a lot of what's happening in Gen Z is they're kind of the first community at scale that's pushing up against the stigma and the shame of being different. And they're saying, forget that crap. This is a situation that needs to be thought of differently. They're fundamentally trying to change the mindset, and they are doing it, as are many folks that don't fall within that segment. I don't want to just be kind of demographic specific here, or generational specific, but it's really a large group of people that are saying, hey, let's talk about the fact that some of us don't think the same. Let's really unpack what it means to be neurodivergent from the typical situation. Let's talk about ADHD. Let's talk about hypertension. Let's talk about well-being, because well-being is basically this catalytic condition in which persistent stress can take an already existing biodiversity, if you want to say it, or just diversity in our community, and it can accelerate it very rapidly. When you're under persistent stress, you may already have, for example, a relationship with stimuli that is overwhelming to you, or you're kind of hypo and you need stimulus to sustain function, to sustain focus, to sustain attention. You may need the buzz of the environment, you might need color, you might need people, you might need open environment, you might need music. Someone might need the opposite. They need neutrality, they need calm, they need attention that comes through quiet. We need to pay attention to those differences. And I think the thing that then kind of accelerates it, the mental health comment, is when the persistent stress occurs, it just accelerates what already existed. It doesn't make it go away. The counterpoint is the folks that are suggesting that we should kind of mask these things. We should check these things at the door. We should opt into the neurotypical conditions which the system is designed to support. And I think that's where the conversation needs to get maybe a little bit more consistent. It needs to get a little bit more depth and rigor to how it's unpacked. We need to appreciate the nuance. We need to trust some of the science around this stuff, and we need to kind of have practical, common sense conversations around implications for our workplace environment.
Tina, what does that actually start to look like? How does that manifest in the built environment then?
I was going to say, Jacob can speak about these things much more eloquently than I can. When I think about this, I think like we pick out all this great furniture to put into a classroom, right? And the furniture addresses needs. A rocking chair or a wobble chair, right, might help a student that's more fidgety. I personally would stand at my desk in elementary school and always be told to sit down. My little brother got tied to his chair once as a joke. But like Jacob was saying, we weren't really addressing these issues as maybe that student learns better standing up or sitting on the floor or in different positions. And a lot of times these pieces end up getting VE'd from projects, and we don't think that we're VEing a learning type. We think we're VEing furniture. And I think there's this idea that we have to have the number of chairs and tables that we're used to plus these other things, because students can't pick where to sit, right? It's going to cause dysfunction in the classroom. But a lot of studies have shown that students, younger students especially, are better at deciding on those things because they're deciding based on their own needs and not based on society's pressures. And so when you offer those environments to them, one day they might feel better sitting on a wobble chair, and one day they might want to sit on the carpet. And they'll decide for themselves, and then they also feel more comfortable in their classroom because it's not, hey, Sally has to sit in that chair because she's different than you. It's, I'm choosing to sit in this chair because it's what benefits me today.
And when you say VE, you mean value engineered,
Yes.
like something was too expensive in the eyes of the budget or whatnot,
And
right?
it's a pretty chair, and it's not the chair that we're used to, so we're going to take it out, right? Because it's probably the thing that's blowing our budget, when really it's, okay, how can we curate these classrooms to serve all of our students? And is that really an extra, or is that a necessity?
Does anyone else want to speak to what Jacob and Tina just said?
So this is fun. So this is what I talk about, connecting the dots. So Tina's the furniture expert. So she just took my part. I love this. So now I'm going to talk about her part. So what's our challenge, and what Jacob is talking about, and what I always saw in the classroom, and we were talking about this, is kind of hitting that 80%, right? We've always done that. It's kind of what we always used to call teaching to the middle, and our furniture always met that, right? We had the desks in rows, and everybody had the same chair, and everybody had the same desk, except for those students that were neurodiverse. They had the special chairs. They had the chair in the back where their wheelchair could roll up to, or they had a table in the front where their aide could sit. So it was very specific where those students were, and they were always identified, and they was always pointed out. And so one of the things that I love today as I'm going in and working with schools is looking at these beautiful spaces that architects are designing, and then really being mindful of what do we put in that room so that everybody feels included. So if we put in a rocker or a wobble stool, that's not just for one student. That's for all the students. Anybody can use that rocker stool at any time of the day, and there's not this like very pigeonholed experience that students are experiencing. The hard part, like Tina said, is the FF&E, and I encourage people to say, really, the budget doesn't have to go over, and you don't have to add furniture. Be mindful of the furniture. And if you're mindful that I need 5 wobble stools that may cost more than a chair, well, how many chairs do we really need in the room? Do we need 30? Can we get by with 15? Can we add some pieces of soft seating? And so really being mindful of the students. My role is to go in on the other end of this that Tina said is helping teachers understand. Last night I told a story at dinner. I was helping a school district, and the operations manager came to me and he said, I need your help. He said, we bought all this new furniture. It was about November, December, and the teachers had moved all the wobble stools out in the hallway and said, go store these somewhere. We don't want these in the building. They're distracting. I don't know how to use them. My classroom management, it doesn't work. And so I walked into his warehouse, and no joke, he had probably 200 wobble stools in his warehouse. And I said, oh, no. Let's figure this out. Anyway, we worked it out. And it was some training with teachers, just having them understand. It's about core. And a student really can only sit on that for about 15, 20 minutes before they fatigue. Once the teachers understood that, then they could incorporate them more appropriately in their classrooms. Today, now this might be today, who knows what happens tomorrow because this is so dynamic, all those wobble stools, I think except for 50, are redistributed back into the schools. The teachers started seeing how do we use it. And so giving people that permission to say, we're creating these new spaces, but also helping them understand how to use those spaces.
try to be succinct here. We're working in schools across the nation that are all on a different continuum of readiness to change. And it's going to impact your sales. It's going to impact your design. 60% of Winneha's portfolio is schools. And so we get to work in Washington and Oregon mostly with schools that are on that continuum. And we have project managers that are having to engage and meet the student, meet the client where they're at. Even if it maybe they see something over here with another district that's so much more adaptable, that's building schools for varying abilities and needs. And then we might work with a client or school district over here that just wants the past replicated. And that's not any different than what's happening in schools. You know, schools are systems. They're large systems, whether it's a small school district or a large school district. They all function off of policy, and they are led by certain percentages of state funding. I had a great conversation this morning talking about capital projects. In Washington State, capital projects are funded by local dollars. So I'll use Renton School District, for example. When I was in charge of curriculum, I did an audit. And there's, 15 or so elementary schools in Renton. And my job was to go into each elementary school and conduct an audit on the curriculum. We're not talking furniture, we're not talking renovate, nothing on the structural or furniture side, but just the curriculum that's put in front of kids. And depending on where you lived in Renton, from the most affluent to fluent, meaning had the most curriculum, learning materials, to the least was somewhere around a $500,000 difference. And how does that happen? Well, at local schools, there's also local dollars. You've all been a part of that. You've been invited, you knew somebody or yourself been invited to a fundraiser. You know, you're buying the painted hands on paper, right? And so the dilemma for me is, and especially, I have a little more fluidity myself as a consultant. I can kind of be a little more picky about where I'm going to spend my time and invest it. But the challenge is always meeting people where they're at and helping them see something they can't see themselves. And, if you go, let's say you're leaving here and you're going to meet with a school district, most school district people making high-level decisions are running with their hair on fire. Patricia and I talked about that at dinner last night. It's like you hardly have time to breathe. So you're not spending a whole lot of time on gifting yourself an opportunity to see different perspectives outside of your world of education. And like Tina said, community engagement, where we see the biggest moves in schools, and it comes out in the way in which the teachers are teaching and how the classrooms are set up, really are in communities where parents are saying, and community leaders are saying, this isn't working for our children. We have to do something different. And they're pushing the envelope. They're pushing change. And so, I don't know what the original question was. I've probably taken us really on a bird walk here. But, all of that to say, you could easily talk yourself out of a sale, out of a job, if you're working with someone and you're so far above what they can, you're so far out there that they can't see you, they can't reach you. And let me tell you, it was very hard for me working with a client who wanted to buy the same desk that I saw like in an antique shop, and yet I had to say to myself, where could there be a small win? And so last story, and Evan was the first person I hired, so he's really near and dear to my heart. And now this division is like way beyond what I could have envisioned. But when Evan and I went to a small school district, and we kind of were faced with that, and he's a very socially minded, socially just person, and we both said, we want to make a change here. We considered it a win when the school district went with the larger size seating chair for every student in the high school, because we were able to show them some data where students weren't fitting into the chairs. And there was this long debate within the school district on whether to buy 15 of those. And we said, well, how would that feel for a student who needs a larger chair? Do they have to go check it out at the office and then carry it around with them? Right? And that was our small win. They didn't do soft seating. They didn't do beautiful pillows. They didn't want any kind of color. They wanted it to last for the next 50 to 70 years. And when we got them to buy the larger seat for every student in that high school, and the question was, well, it won't fit well for the smaller student. And we said, well, then they can use their coat and build a little cushion for themselves, right? That was a win. So, you know, it's kind of like we got to take our wins where we can get them.
Well, and show a lot of empathy as well. I like how you're talking about we have this curse of knowledge, right, around the things we think we know or do know, and the person across the table from us, they're living a completely different experience. So thank you for that reminder. We're tiptoeing around this concept. We're just not calling it, we're not naming it yet, but inclusive design. Can, specifically the Gensler people, but I mean anyone, can we just make sure that we're on the same page about what inclusive design means and then the ramifications for space, what that looks like? Whoever wants to go.
I'll be the simple-minded answer, and
that's good for me.
It'll be quick. I think it's a very difficult challenge to be inclusive. It's a commitment to appreciating the diversity of need and preference in our community, whether that's a student body or wherever we might be designing. For me, the secret sauce is to look for opportunities to create variance in the environment, create permission to choose. So it's the creation of flexibility and choice, and there's a lot of cultural implications there. And you mentioned the word empathy. It's destigmatizing it in every way possible, whether that's not having the wide chair, just having a chair. Like, that's an example of creating normacy within a space that could otherwise be different. So, I mean, for me, this is strategy to inclusivity, just talking about implications, is opportunities for variance, creating personal choice and control and flexibility, and approaching with empathy so there's no stigma around those choices.
I'll be honest, I moved here about a year ago from Texas, and so when I think of inclusivity, it starts with the largely marginalized groups and demographics and the environments that we have kind of put them in as a society, and then it moves on to the broader, well, you have to be inclusive of everyone, right? Like, neurodiversity falls into that category. ADA falls into that category. I worked on a school where a member of the school board had a student who was in special education, and their ed specs required a special education zone separate from the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade pods. And she said, I don't want my kid having to go across the school, because they need extra time on a test and be separated from the rest of their peers. So we looked at, okay, well, how do we start incorporating these classrooms in their pods? Thank you. And so that parent who sat on that school board had a big effect on the way the school district was looking at how they were organizing their school. And I think that's inclusivity, right? There are students who might have different needs, and how do we address those needs within our classrooms and within our classroom pods? I think that also goes back to equity and making sure that students are getting what they need and teachers are getting what they need and all those tools are available for them. So if you take a student who's neurodivergent, in Louisiana, we didn't have separate classrooms for students that were autistic. So if you take an autistic student and they were in grades kindergarten through 12th grade with me, I don't leave 12th grade never interacting with someone, who's autistic before. So when I am in the real world and I experience people who come from different situations and different backgrounds, I have the knowledge of how to interact with them, and I think that's what inclusivity is. It's kind of, again, we're creating these classrooms for our students, and we're curating what they're exposed to, and we want to make sure that we're showing them what exists in our society and not just like what we think they're going to feel safe in.
Okay. That helped, thank you. A lot of you, when we've been talking offline, said that well-being is just a huge issue for you. But I mean, that's very broad. So how would we address this issue of well-being in K-12 environments? Melanie?
So, I always come back to students believe what adults believe about them. And that can be seen in individualized instruction. If you're, it's only been since the 90s that you could go to school in Federal Way and move to Spokane as a third grader and get relatively the same topics taught. So prior to the 90s, any school you went into in Washington State, you could have a wide varying, there was about what second graders might get. You might get this content, but there wasn't a standard set. So it made it really challenging for students who moved a lot. Think about it in our area, with housing. Students can move in the I-5 corridor, they can move to 5 different school districts in a school year. And if there isn't an expectation of what you're going to get as a 10th grader, it can be taught in Seattle in the fall, and you're getting it again in Renton, and then you move to Federal Way, and they do it in the early spring, and then you land in Auburn, and they end right before summer. And you've just spent a whole year learning the same thing. So it's a, education in itself is just a really short time, really short lifespan of thinking differently. Thinking about varying abilities, thinking about, you think it's a field of the most compassionate people, and it is. But a lot of the systems are very archaic. They are the mainstream systems. They are if it works for this group of people, or, there's a change and there's a shift in hiring, but many times, many teachers are teaching because they really enjoyed the education they had, and that's what's drawn them back to that field. So, you think about your world from your pedagogy, from your training. You've been thinking about adaptability and flexibility and being nimble. And really, those are fairly young concepts in traditional education. And you think back in the 90s, charter schools were failing. So your option were, a private school or a public school. And there wasn't a lot of innovation happening. And if it did, would it have the stamina to actually change policy, which really does drive the education engine? So the exciting part is the educators are starting to learn, and systems are starting to learn to partner. And folks like yourself are being brave and bold, and you're having these conversations, and you're actually helping the people working in the work on the work. And maybe you don't realize it. When you leave, I guarantee you, there's probably been some conversations you've had about anything, really. And after you leave, there's an educator Googling it, wondering, neurodiversity? Oh, yes, okay, I do know what that is, right? Because the system is like a fine-oiled machine, and it takes partners to introduce these new ideas and concepts.
I think also our kids are going to these schools for so much of their formidable years, and you have one kid going to a school where there's black mold and staph infection in the locker rooms, and trust me, those schools exist. And then they go play soccer at another school where they have brand new turf fields, and they think, this is what society thinks of me, and this is what society thinks of them. And that is what we are putting in these children's minds until they're adults. And so I think you can provide good infrastructure and good architecture and good design, and it doesn't have to be expensive. And we have to start taking responsibility for kind of bringing schools up together, as opposed to giving one school carpet and marble floors and not addressing the staph infection and black mold in another school.
And I'm not trying to shift, but I do want to cover a couple other things. These are all great points. You've told me some great stories, though, offline, Patricia, and I just want to make sure they hear them. But one of your superpowers is to come in and completely redo a learning environment, but actually show people how to use it and educate people. What are some of the things you've learned about traveling the country, and what stories can you share with us?
So when I moved to Artcobell and was part of this and working with designers, and like I said, I travel and I would go see a school being installed, and then 2 months later I'd go back and I'd see that furniture was being moved out, or teachers were just trying to reconfigure their rooms into the tools they'd had before. And like Jacob says, is I had to sit back and I had to ask the question, what's going on? Like what's happening? And realize that there's this disconnect. And I try to equate it when I talk to folks, and I'm like, so you go to work. Now, that's a whole nother conversation, and Michael, I don't know if we're going to get there today, about the world of work is changing, right? But just say, let's play a little game that I went to work every day, and I had an office, and I had a desk, and I had a pencil drawer, and I had a computer, and I had a phone, and I had all these things, and my systems were in place. Parent come in to meet with me, I knew where the parent would sit. And I talked to that parent. If a student came in, I dealt with them on discipline. I know where they would sit. And I started thinking about what would happen if someone just came in and cleared out my office and brought me a whole nother set of tools. How long would it take me to adapt to that environment? And that's when I started realizing that we were working with teachers that had 15, 20 years of experience, that were probably really good teachers, that were making effective gains with their students and probably really liked their students really liked them. But we were creating these new environments that we all believe is right. It supports our diverse students. It promotes inclusion. It gives them choice and all these different things. We were missing the link that these 20-year vets were kind of feeling like that we didn't value them. That, hey, we're going to come in and take away all your tools that you're used for classroom management, content creation, how we do things, and we're going to give you a whole new set of tools, but we're not going to teach you how to use those tools.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that was the disconnect, and so I've been working with schools on how to help your teachers, and it's usually, as Melanie says, heat of the moment, right? When do we hire teachers sometimes for a new building? 2 days before the building opens, right? We're in a hurry. We don't get that FTE until July, and that building opens in August. Half the time, we don't even know the teachers that are going to fill those spaces. So what do we do? So those are some of the things that I see, and the other movement that I talked a little bit with Michael yesterday, and I don't want to hog the mic, but this one is what I see that's really happening in our schools is they want change. You walk into classrooms, and I see they're bringing in the couch that their neighbor had on the stoop to be disposed of, right? They've got wobble stools or something from some that's not school furniture manufacturers, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but sometimes they're just not durable enough to have in a classroom. But they're bringing things in to create these environments that we're talking about that's so critical for schools. And I shared with Michael yesterday, I had a superintendent I was working with in Chicago, shout out Kirby 140, want to do that really quick. And the superintendent walked into a classroom, and there was a tire in the middle of the floor, in the middle of this classroom. Brand new superintendent. And he said, I didn't know what to do. He goes, it was a tire, and it was painted fluorescent green. And he was like, I just was not okay with that my community would see that. It was dirty. Would the kids get hurt? He had all these questions about this green tire. But as he continued to go into the classroom, every time he walked in there was a kid sitting in that tire. They were engaged. They were working. They were involved in their education. And he then stepped back and said, maybe I'm missing the point. I'm not asking the right connection or the right questions. He started a movement in his district called flexible seating. That's what they term it. And it's been going on for 5 years, and he does pilot classrooms where teachers can choose their furniture. And then I go in and do professional development for them. it's really interesting because, and it's in existing schools, so there's no renovation, there's no new buildings, there's no adaptation. They still have the old casework in there, and we're making it work. And that's not what it's about, right? It's recreating environments for these students so that every child feels included. And then what happens is the shift in the teachers. I start seeing some teachers who said, I can't accommodate for this certain student to be in my classroom. Maybe they're autistic. I can't accommodate for them. Now, the conversation is, I can accommodate for them because I have great stuff in my room that allows me to, bring that student into my class. So there's starting to be these shifts that are occurring. And so those are some of the things that I see as I travel across the country, and is so powerful and exciting, and that I would love to blast across the world. But those are the things, those nuggets that we need to take, and we need to continue to move forward and push those ideas.
Okay. I like that. I like the big tire. I want to see a picture of that. In my head, there's spiders living in there. That's a little concerning, but that's okay. We briefly, because especially two people in the audience mentioned technology. They wanted to hear about the evolving technologies in the classroom, what that means. That's a big thing to cover. But what are some of your high-level thoughts on how technology is affecting the evolving learning environment?
I'll just say flexibility. We have to create classrooms that can evolve with the technology. So a robotics lab today is not going to house the same equipment as it is tomorrow. So it's less about what technology today we're putting in the spaces, and how can we create spaces that are flexible enough to change with the classrooms, because they're not building a new classroom every 5 years. An iPhone comes out every 6 months now. They're not putting in new TVs every year, but every 3 years, if they want to do a small technology refresh, they have to have the infrastructure and the rooms that can support it.
It just took me back to 2006. Seems like forever ago. I saw this email. We did have email back then, and it came from the director of technology at the school district, and it was a grant. And if you got it, it was with Hewlett-Packard and the International Society for Technology Education. And so I decided I was going to apply. I mean, it came from the district. It must be approved, right? I later found out that's not really, they hadn't read it. But anyways, we got it. And it was about $250,000 worth of hardware. But the biggest win was 2006 is not very long ago. I got a team together and we brainstormed how we would support the adult learners with technology. So where I'm going with this is we've got to have the infrastructure to run technology smoothly. Because if it fails more than once, what I see with teachers, that they'll just stop using it, right? So it's got to be reliable. But what I thought was interesting, and this is not a joke, this really happened. I had 2 teachers come to me privately. Can I talk to you? Sure. So they came in, separately, but they said the exact same thing. They said, well, I want to start going to these professional developments we're going to have every Friday morning. At that time, latte stands were not as popular as they are now, so we had Latte Friday, but it was come in and learn technology. Both teachers said, I got my master's in technology, but I don't want anybody to know, and I don't want you to call on me and ask me to help you with these. Okay, well, tell me more about that. Well, we had a word processor when I got my master's in technology. So when I think about technology from the adult, I go back to Patricia, is that there's a lot of learning that needs to go on. So it's kind of like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, we definitely need the infrastructure to do the technology. Then we need the education learning. And finally, what ended up happening was that grant was a 2-year grant, which had lots of professional learning. And the biggest win that made me a believer of technology was a teacher really took it head on, and she said, I'm going to run these literacy groups with with the technology that I have and the software that comes with it. And each of the students was assigned a Disney character, or they got to choose a character, a Disney character. What happened with the data, over 2 years, students who were receiving special education services and students who were designated as multilingual learners or English language learners with limited language skills were soaring at rates equal or above students who did not have those labels. And it was because they were in the classroom during the main parts of learning. They weren't being pulled and missing things as they transitioned. And they got to have an identity that wasn't already told to them. And I remember this one 6th grade gal, this one student, she said, you know, we talked about the gains she had made. And she said, I got to feel smart. I got to be that person. When in traditional services, she was pulled out because she wasn't. And so there was a huge shift. Not only that, there was adaptive technology that could be installed with the software that helped to create some equal playing fields so students could have that shared success.
Yeah, we talk a lot, and we're talking about all the things that are wrong. And there's some positivity, though, here, too. But how can we actually start to chip away at some of these issues? Or could we have one small win in the next few months, and what would that be? Help us kind of start to make sense of all this.
I
Think
talked
about
to
it.
one district who was taking away things from classrooms. So there's a lot of, sometimes you walk into a classroom, it's overwhelming the amount of stuff in there, right? There's things on the wall and, visuals on the floor even, and tables. And she said, we took away all of our teachers' desks, which was very jarring for them at first. We cleared all the walls and created designated places for them to put it, because you're putting a kid in front of a desk, asking them to take a test and look at all these things that are stimulating you on the walls. And so we started from that kind of reductive approach. I think I do it with my house. Like, that's something that everyone can do right now, as you kind of walk into a space and you think, well, what do I not need? What is not serving me today? And she said, at first, taking away those desks, again, like, teachers were not happy about it, but we gave them these chairs and these small mobile tables, and it worked out really well because they were able to kind of roll up to the student that they were working with and roll back. And so not having that in their classroom gave them space to do other things. And I think that's like a really easy way that we can kind of start looking at our classrooms today and curating them without having to pass a bond or looking at more money being spent, which I know is a difficult part for all educators.
I think just leveling the playing field on, not this isn't a comment on nomenclature, but I think there's an opportunity within the neurodivergent space. There's an opportunity within the context of the built environment to bring attention to the fact that a lot of these design decisions are intentional, from the not using an incandescent light on the technology front, which is not some fancy new AI chatbot that's helping you kind of access information in a new way and, leveraging the power of technology. It's a very simple decision, but in the classroom context, a lighting control might be just as powerful as a new robotics lab. So I think what we need to do is, within the context of the 20%, not the 80%, we need to bring to people's attention that there's a lot of decisions that are very intentional, and just level the playing field so we can build on top of that with our generative creative thinking, and not kind of allow good ideas to fall through the cracks again. Because what I see happening is a lot of progress, and then we take 3 steps back again. That's kind of disappointing. It's the warehouse full of chairs that are allowing kids to fidget physically in a classroom. So I don't know. I just would like to see all the ingenuity that is happening be captured and connected to the science, so that people can appreciate what the new baseline is, and we can start building on top of all the great ideas, and not slip back to kind of the old, kind of archaic way of approaching it, which feels normal.
Okay, so I do a lot of work on restorative practices. So there's two things, and I'm saying it to myself right now. One is speak from the heart and trust that you'll know what to say, right? So that I can stay in the listening mode. So I'm going to do that. I think the celebration that I see with all of you and your brilliance and your creativity and your insight is to stay visionary. There's going to be this pressure to go into a system, any system, but I'll speak from public education, that's institutionalized, that's trying to do better and be better. And it is folks like you. You can drop a little nugget of vision that they can't see, but they can really get curious about it and wonder about it. In the end, will it change the type of sale they do, the type of, room that's built, the type of furniture? I believe it will. I've seen it happen. The fear of not saying anything is that we'll never see the new of what's to come. And so that would be the celebration, is take your journey, your passion, and keep helping folks like myself in school districts help us be more visionary on what that can play out. We're completely, we're very, what's the word for it? Resourceful. We're super resourceful. And now if you put resourceful and visionary together, then we're gonna have changes we never thought we could do.
Thank you.
And just quickly, I think it takes me back to what I said in the beginning, is that we're all in this together. And Michael's asking, what can we just do here in the near future? And I love what Jacob is saying is we bring to them the knowledge and the support and that help to see something different and then continue to provide that support so they don't slide back, right? We all slide back to what's comfortable. And I was talking to someone this morning just that schools, people from the outside look at schools and they say, they're difficult to change. They don't change. But people don't always see what's going on behind those walls. I was a school administrator. Change was happening every day. May it be district initiatives, community support, what student behavior, technology that was coming in that was influencing our systems and our policy. So change is occurring, but how can we provide that stability for school districts when we want to connect these dots, help them so they don't slide back into what's normal, because sometimes that's what our community sees, right? A superintendent's got to go out and push that envelope to say, we're going to transform learning environments, when the community has said, I learned just fine in a classroom that had inline rows. What do you mean you're doing? So how can we help them? How can we support them to not slide back into what's easy and continue? I love the fact, ask those questions, what Melanie's saying. How do we ask the questions? How do we support them and give them little nuggets of knowledge to continue to move forward?
Thank you so much for coming to our new showroom. It's a work in progress, but it looks awesome. It's, we moved it around today, and I think it took on a new life. And then if you have questions for us, please come and chat. And that's it. Thank you, panelists. You did fantastic. A well-deserved round of applause.